Okay, this is study 2 on our lessons in the book of Daniel. Of course, it was written by the prophet Daniel between the years 607 BC and 534 BC while he was captive in Babylon. Clarence Larkin says in his Daniel commentary, the book of Daniel is the apocalypse of the Old Testament, as the book of Revelation is the apocalypse of the New Testament, and one cannot be understood without the other. God said to Daniel in chapter 12, verse 4, "Shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." Wow, we know that's happened, don't we? God said to John the Apostle in Revelation 22:10, "Seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand." He said to Daniel, "Seal yours up till the end." And he said to John, "Seal not the sayings, because the time is at hand." Hey, it is near the end, folks. The book of Daniel is no longer sealed to the Christian believer, and that is one more reason we can know the coming of Jesus must be getting very close. I was blessed to hear some very good Bible teachers as I was growing up. Now, a lot of it went in one ear and out the other, but I was always impressed by prophecy. Daniel tells us world history in advance. A lot of it is in the past and has happened already, just like he said it would. There's only a little bit left to go. Since all the other has come to pass, as prophesied, we can know the rest of it will too. It is all actually, literally, being fulfilled before our eyes even now. And as I've said before, we are living in biblical times. I think the rapture is near. Clarence Larkin died in 1924, before his book on Daniel was even published. His book on Revelation was copyrighted in 1919, and the book Dispensational Truth in 1918. In all of them, he puts Israel back in her land as a nation. There was no Israel for almost 2,000 years, yet Mr. Larkin and others wrote about Israel as a fact existing in the latter days. The reason they could do that with assurance is because of all the other Bible prophecies that have taken place, been fulfilled just as predicted. So there had to be an Israel in existence in the last days, because Israel is who the book of Revelation is all about. It's the time of Jacob's trouble. It's about Israel. Israel is a nation, and Israel is in her land at Jesus' second coming. But hey, again, for almost 2,000 years, there was no Israel. Nobody ever thought there would be an Israel. And now there is an Israel. Since 1948, it was made a nation again, and boom, 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 things keep happening just right down the line, just like the Bible says it would. A special blessing is promised in Revelation chapter 1 to those who read or hear the words of this prophecy. Dr. Jack Hyles used to say that he read it out loud to himself so he could get a double blessing at once. And blessed means to be made happy. One way prophecy has tremendously made me happy is in seeing all that's been fulfilled. So think of all the other good things in the Bible we can know will be fulfilled also. And that is truth. It will be fulfilled, and it's the truth that save loved ones who have died. We're going to see them again. We're going to see them again. And one day we will live and never grow old, never have a pain, never have sorrow, never have death again, and all tears will be wiped away because of the past prophecy that's been fulfilled. We know that will be fulfilled as well. We can know that we can really give our cares to Jesus and know that He really is in control and He knows all about it, and He's helping us. He's helping us to grow through our troubles. He's there with us. We can know that. Those people who have hurt you and done you wrong, you can give that to Jesus too. You don't have to worry about it. God's going to take care of them too. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. And in the meantime, He's going to make you like Him. If you're leaning on Him and looking in His Word, He's going to help you to have compassion on those hateful, critical, mean people, because, hey, if they don't get saved, they're going to go to hell one day. Oh my goodness, if we could get the mind of Jesus like we're supposed to, we would see so many things in such a different way, wouldn't we? Well, it amazes me that some people don't want to hear Bible prophecy. They don't want to read it. They stay as far away from the book of Revelation as they can. They don't know what a blessing they are missing. Now, let's look at Daniel chapter 1. And get your pen, your paper, take notes, look this up for yourself, because like I tell you, I may be wrong. You might can teach me some things. Look it up for yourself. Study it on your own. Let my study just be a start for yours. Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And then another verse I want you to look at and jot it down. Genesis 10:10. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. This is speaking of Nimrod. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel in the land of Shinar. Shinar, the land of Shinar in Daniel 1:2, is located in the region of Mesopotamia, also called the Fertile Crescent, and is situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Shinar is also called Sumer. The Sumerians are some of the ones of the very first known of the civilization, where it got its start, and secular writings will take you all the way back 10,000 or more years, but we know it wasn't that far. It was only to right after Nimrod and not Nimrod, but after Noah and his 3 sons got off the ark. Okay. But Shinar is, I get ahead of myself here. Shinar is also called Sumer. The Sumerians are some of the first known of the civilization too, because they were descendants of Noah. Babylon, and the Garden of Eden were all located in the same area that we now know as modern-day Iraq. According to the Bible, Mesopotamia is the oldest known civilization. It's where God started over with Noah and his family, migrating there from Mount Ararat. Egypt runs a close second to being the oldest known civilization, just because of the writing or different things that were found. Y'all gonna have to listen to YouTube and find out. But that's what we studied in school, that Egypt was the oldest known civilization, but it's not. It's Mesopotamia. Egypt runs a close second because after the confusion of the languages at the Tower of Babel and the people being scattered there, they scattered everywhere, and Egypt was one of the places. And that's why we see a lot of similarities between the two areas of Mesopotamia and Egypt, such as all the many gods that were worshipped. Only the names have been changed, but they all have the same basic story to go with them. Another thing is very similar is the pyramids of Egypt and the ziggurats of Babylon. The pyramids were tombs. The ziggurats of Babylon were temples. but they had a similar structure. But the ziggurats had steps on each side leading to the top to what is thought to have been a shrine for their priest up there, and also for an observatory to gaze at the stars. You know, the Babylonians were known for their astrology and the stargazing and all that. The worship of the pagan god Baal, along with the rebellion of Israel against God's commands, is what eventually caused their captivity. If you read your Bible, you'll see that all the way through it. I mean, all the way through it. Baal worship, Baal worship, Baal worship. And then it turned into other gods were named, but the names were just changed. In the New Testament, it's Zeus and Jupiter and Diana and all of those different gods. And I believe it is very, very significant that Israel's 70-year captivity took place in Babylon. First, Israel was taken by Assyria, and then about 100 years later, Judah was taken by Babylon, and Jerusalem was left desolate. These were both cities whose founder was Nimrod. Now, I've not seen a clear statement in the Bible that says Baal worship had its beginning in Babylon, or that Noah's grandson Nimrod was worshipped as Baal. But putting the pieces together from the Bible along with secular historical writings and findings from archaeology, I think it's safe to say that Baal worship got its start in Babylon with the building of the Tower of Babel. Nimrod being the instigator of it all, and later being worshipped there as king and as the god Marduk, later known as Baal. Now in Wikipedia it says this about Marduk, who is also known as Baal. Marduk was the patron deity of the city of Babylon. Some secular historians trace it back all the way to the reign of Hammurabi. Well, it was before him. We can tell from the Bible it was before him, but that's where secular history goes. Okay, Wikipedia again. They worshipped many gods, but Marduk was the main god of Babylon. The history of worship of Marduk is tied to the history of Babylon. And the history of Babylon is tied to Nimrod and the beginning of his kingdom being Babel. Genesis 10:10 tells us that. Okay, back to Wikipedia. As Babylon's power increased, so did the position of Marduk. By the end of the second millennium BC, Marduk was sometimes just referred to as Baal, B-E-L, meaning Lord. So, even Nimrod and his kingdom being mentioned in Genesis 10, verse 10, is significant. Genesis 10:10 says, "And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel in the land of Shinar." In biblical numerology, 10 equals the Gentile number. Genesis 10 lists the Gentile nations. Genesis 10:10 gives the first Gentile world empire, which was Babel. Romans 10 gives the plan of salvation for Gentiles in this age, and there are 10 final Gentile nations in the tribulation. Revelation 17 tells us about that. Genesis 10:10, "And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel." Nimrod and his trying to unite everyone in the building of the Tower of Babel pictures the Antichrist in the latter days, with the Gentile nations being united to form a one-world government and a one-world religion. The times of the Gentiles had its beginning when Israel was first taken into captivity at Babylon, and will end with the second coming of Jesus. We're told in Genesis 10, verses 8 through 20, that Nimrod began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So Babel was just the beginning of his kingdom. This guy Nimrod was big back in the ancient world. From there, he expanded his territory to Assyria and built several cities. One of them was Nineveh. We've all heard of Nineveh and how it was so bad God was going to destroy it. In the verses that follow in Genesis 10, we can see that also out of Nimrod's lineage came the Philistines, the Canaanites, along with a bunch of other bad boys. But those are a few you might recognize. Nimrod is not mentioned a lot in Scripture, but God never gave the bad guys too much press. He is mentioned enough, however, that we know he had a very, very powerful influence over the people. Secular history tells us that he was considered to be a god. Marduk was the king of Babylonian gods, also known as Bel. This god Marduk was portrayed as a king, a hunter, and a warrior. Nimrod fit the description. In the years that followed the flood, the animals were no longer tame. Protection was needed from them. Nimrod gave the people what they needed. That he was called a mighty hunter probably was the beginning of his fame as a protector of the people. And I think he might have even been a giant. The Canaanites, the Philistines were in his lineage, and we know Goliath was a giant. We know about the Anak in Numbers. Those people were giants left over from the flood some way through Ham and his wife probably, and I can't go into that today, but anyway, he could have been, for people to have thought so much of him, to have followed him as they did. And another thing is that Tower of Babel, that magnificent Tower of Babel that was somewhat like the pyramids. I'm just thinking, okay, if he wasn't a giant, he was a powerful, powerful man that knew how to get all the people behind him to do all that work. In Isaiah 23, verse 13, Nimrod is called the Assyrian. In Isaiah 23:13, it says, "Behold the land of the Chaldeans. This people was not till the Assyrian founded it. For them that dwell in the wilderness, they set up the towers thereof. They raised up the palaces thereof, and he brought it to ruin." This verse may have a double application, but for sure there were towers set up all around in Babylon. You can still see the ruins of them today. And he, being indwelt by Satan, did bring it to ruin. Babylon in the end was left desolate. God used it to punish his people, and in turn he used Media Persia to punish Babylon. Isaiah says his hand has found the kingdom of the idols. About Nimrod, it says in Genesis 10, verses 10 through 12, "The beginning of his kingdom was Babel in the land of Shinar." These verses list other places Nimrod founded, both Babylon and Assyria. God used both of these idol-worshipping places as tools to judge his people Israel. And then he punished both of them for their treatment of Israel. The Assyrian says in Isaiah 10, 8 through 11, "My hand hath founded the kingdom of idols." The Assyrian is boasting of all the kingdoms he's infiltrated and finished off with his idols, and thinks he's going to do the same with God's people, but he's not. He doesn't even think about that even though they have become a worshiper of idols, God's still on their side. God is still on Israel's side. Historically, the Assyrian here is talking about Sennacherib, but prophetically, it's talking about Nimrod or the Antichrist, who is ultimately Satan. The word Assyrian is from the word Asher in Genesis 10, and Assyria was known as the land of Nimrod, who was a type of the Antichrist. Nimrod, the Assyrian, was the founder of the kingdom of idols. Micah 5:5-6 identifies Nimrod also as the king of Babylon, and so was the first Gentile world power, which started a long series of powers that will end in Revelation with the Antichrist. I think if you do the research yourself, you can see that the worship of Baal that got Israel in so much trouble and led to their captivity, it all leads back to Nimrod and the Tower of Babel and all the counterfeit religious systems of Satan. The names of the gods and the goddesses have changed through the ages, through the different cultures, but each had their start in Babylon with Nimrod. The prophet Jeremiah prophesies the fall of both Assyria and Babylon. And of Babylon in Jeremiah 50, verse 2, he says, Babylon is taken, Bel is confounded, Marduk is broken in pieces, her idols are confounded, her images are broken in pieces. This also has a double application to latter days and the tribulation, when Satan and his false religion is totally destroyed. Revelation 17 and 18. In the book of Revelation, Babylon is called the Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots. And it's called that because it's the mother of all false religions of the world. It'll be the place where they will all gather to be Antichrist, one world religion under his one world government. And that's what Nimrod wanted, was a one world thing, when God had told them clearly to scatter. Satan's ultimate counterfeit religion will one day be destroyed. Since the physical Babylon has already been destroyed, some think the headquarters for this system will be Rome, and they have a lot of good reasons for that, and we may get into that later in this study. I include all that I'm including in this lesson because I do believe it is significant that this captivity was in Babylon. There comes a time when God will leave a person or a nation alone and let them have what they want. And that's the very worst thing God can do, is to leave us alone. But he eventually will if we keep refusing his call, so that many times it will be our own sin that chastises us and drives us back to him, because sin always ends bad. It's a very painful way to go, and it doesn't have to be that way. Just turn back to God wherever you are. Turn back to God. His arms are open wide, waiting for you. His hand is there to lift you up when you stumble. Just look to him. Since Israel just couldn't seem to get enough of that pagan religion, when God finally had enough, he put them right there in the center of what they had always wanted, so that maybe they would get enough of it, and they did. After the 70-year captivity, they had nothing else to do with the idol worship. Went all the way through the rest of the Bible, that's what they did. They had their idols, they had their images, they bowed down to them, although God told them over and over and over, don't bow to an image, don't bow to stone, don't bow to your gods of wood, look to me. But anyway, okay, so God put them right there in the middle of what they'd always wanted, and it wouldn't be the first time God did something like this. Remember when Israel complained in the wilderness wanderings in Numbers 11 that in Egypt they had good stuff to eat. They had leeks and onions, and they had meat, and they were so tired of eating nothing but this manna. So God gave them what they wanted. He said, okay, you want meat? I'm going to give you some meat to eat. I'm going to give you so much meat to eat that you're going to gag on it. You're going to get sick of it. It's going to be coming out your nostrils. You're going to have so much of it. So they've always craved the gods of Babylon, and here in Daniel, that's where they find themselves. They are enslaved in Babylon because that's what sin does. That's what Satan does. That's what his false gods and counterfeit religions are all about. Satan will make you a slave to sin. God gives us freedom. There is freedom in Jesus Christ. But Satan wants to make us a slave, and he will make you miserable, and then he will kill you if God allows it. So don't go that way. Go God's way. They got what they wanted, but it did not make them happy. The things we worship today as gods in our world, they will never make us happy either. It's all found in Jesus Christ. Our joy is all found in Jesus Christ. Now, many Bible scholars agree with this study about Nimrod and the Babylonian religion. Among some of them I've read after, and there's been others, but Peter Ruckman, J. Vernon McGee, Chuck Missler, David Hoffman, H.H. Haley, Charles Lawson, many, many others, they agree with this about Nimrod being the founder of the Baal worship back in Babylon, and they all refer us back to a book by Alexander Hislop called The Two Babylons. If interested, you may want to read it, but another shorter condensed version I like is The Babylon Religion by David W. Daniels. And there's also a lot about it in the early editions of Haley's Bible Handbook. Now, I'm a doubter. I'm like doubting Thomas. I have to see to believe sometimes. I have to see it for myself in black and white. Even when I read things by people that I know are brilliant and that I know I can trust because I've checked things out they've said before, I still want to see it for myself before I teach it. And since it doesn't come right out and say a lot of this about Nimrod in the Bible, I wanted to know where they got it from, they got it from Alexander Hislop, a lot of it, and I wanted to know, well, where did you get it, since it doesn't say it in black and white in the Bible? So I researched every single thing I could find online and on YouTube and Christian articles and secular articles. I've listened to so many sermons and so many lectures and Bible studies. I am about sick of hearing about it, so much so that I almost didn't even give you the study on it, having to repeat it again. And it's hard to get it all together in a condensed version to give you. So I'm telling you where you can go if you want to read more about it. You just look up any of these things on YouTube that I've mentioned, or get these books. But ancient historical writers such as Herodotus and Josephus and others mention Nimrod and his kingdom and the towers at Babylon. Their writings are confirmed by one another, and putting all the pieces together along with what history and archaeology has confirmed, I'm confident now that the brilliant Bible scholars I follow know what they're talking about. And I say that laughingly because I know that it is funny for someone like me to think I have to check up on what these guys are saying. But like I said, I have to see for myself. I'm a stubborn child. I want to see it for myself. So you'll be getting bits and pieces of it at a time as I continue the study, hopefully. Believe me, you wouldn't want it all at once. There is so much. And hopefully in our next study, I'll get more into chapter 1 and go from there, get all this historical stuff behind us. But I think it's good for you to know the basics of the beginning of Babylon and the Tower of Babel, where it all got its start. So I hope this blesses you, and I hope you go back and look these up for yourself. And I want you to know I love you all. I've been sick, and then after I was sick with the flu or COVID or something, I'm not sure what it was. After I was sick with that, I had this awful cough, and I still have a little cough. So I've just not been able to get back on YouTube, but I have made good use of my time and in watching these lectures and these studies and reading all this stuff. So hopefully you'll use it as a start for your own study. God bless you all, and I love you, and I pray for you. I am so appreciative of every one of my YouTube subscribers.